My hand was shaking so hard the folder nearly slipped out of it. I stood in the hallway outside my mother-in-law's kitchen, my bare feet cold against the tile, and I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Because through the half-open door, I heard her voice, low, syrupy, the voice she used when she thought no one was listening. "She'll never know it's gone until it's too late," she said. "By the time she checks that account, it'll already be in my name." I pressed the folder against my chest like it could stop my heart from pounding through my ribs. Someone laughed on the other end of that call. A laugh I recognized. I looked down at the folder in my hands. 3 months of work. Every bank statement, every forged signature, every lie printed, dated, tabbed. She had no idea I already knew everything. My name is Maren Ellison. I was 41 years old, and I had spent 12 years building something out of nothing. When I was 29, I started a home design and staging company out of the back of my Honda Civic, armed with a tape measure, a laptop with a crack screen, and $600 I'd saved from a job I hated. By the time I turned 40, Ellison and Company had 4 employees, a studio in the Arts District, and annual revenue north of $1.2 million. I hadn't inherited a dime of that. I'd built it client by client, sleepless night by sleepless night, while my husband Colin worked his way up at an engineering firm downtown. Together we'd saved carefully. Not flashy careful. We had $340,000 sitting in a joint trust account, money we'd earmarked for one thing: buying the building next to my studio, expanding the business, finally putting down permanent roots. It was the kind of money you don't talk about at parties, the kind of money that takes a decade to build and an afternoon to lose. And the family relationship hanging over all of it, the one I'd spent years trying to protect, was my marriage to Colin, and by extension my relationship with his mother, Diane Ashford. Diane had never liked me much. She'd never said it outright. She said it in other ways, in comments about my little hobby business, in the way she introduced me at parties as Colin's wife. She does some kind of design thing. I'd let it go for years. I told myself family peace was worth swallowing my pride. I didn't know yet that peace was exactly what she was counting on. It was a Sunday dinner in March, 6 months before that hallway moment. Diane hosted, as she always did, in her cream dining room with the good china she only brought out for company she wanted to impress or manipulate. She was wearing a strand of pearls that day, the one she called her important pearls, and she poured herself a second glass of Chardonnay before the appetizers even hit the table. "Colin, sweetheart," she said, swirling her glass, not even looking at me, "I've been talking to my financial guy, and I think it's time we restructure some of your accounts. For tax efficiency. You two are so busy, you shouldn't have to think about all that." Colin, exhausted from a 60-hour work week, just nodded and said, "Sure, Mom, whatever's easiest." I remember setting my fork down very quietly. Across the table, Diane's daughter, Colin's sister, Paige, caught her mother's eye for half a second too long. It was barely anything. Flicker. The kind of look you'd miss if you weren't already the type of person who'd learned the hard way to watch people's hands more than their words. I smiled, took a sip of wine, and said nothing. But that night, lying next to Colin in the dark, I stared at the ceiling and thought, restructure what exactly? I didn't confront anyone. I've never been a person who confronts first and asks questions later. I ask questions first. Quietly. Thoroughly. I called our bank the following week, using the excuse of verifying account details before a home renovation loan. The teller, a woman named Renata who I'd built a friendly rapport with over the years, mentioned almost in passing, "Oh, and I see the new power of attorney is on file now. Should make things easier for you." I kept my voice perfectly even. "Right, of course. Remind me, when was that filed?" "4 weeks ago," she said. Diane Ashford came in with Colin's signature already on it. I thanked her, hung up, and sat in my car in the studio parking lot for 11 minutes without moving. Colin hadn't signed anything. I knew that because Colin had been in Denver on a work trip the entire week that document was supposedly signed. I brought it up carefully over coffee the following Sunday. I kept my tone light, almost apologetic, like I was the one who might be confused. "Diane, I saw there's a power of attorney on our joint account now. Can you walk me through that?" She didn't even blink. She set down her cup, folded her hands, and gave me the smile she reserved for people she considered beneath serious explanation. "Oh, that's just intergenerational wealth structuring, dear. My estate attorney recommended a fiduciary bridge so that if anything happened to Colin's father's side of things, the assets could pass through a revocable framework without probate delay. It protects everyone. It's very standard." It was, of course, nonsense. Jargon strung together to sound official to someone she assumed wouldn't push back. I nodded slowly, let my eyes go a little glassy, and said, "Oh, that makes sense. Thank you for looking out for us." Inside, I was already planning my next move. 2 weeks later, I paid a visit to a corporate records search site I used for vetting clients' contractors. On a hunch, I searched Diane's name alongside Colin's and mine. There it was. Ashford Family Holdings, LLC, registered 11 weeks earlier. Listed members: Diane Ashford and Maren Ellison. My name on a company I had never heard of, never signed for, never agreed to. The registered agent was a notary named Harold Weiss, a man I recognized instantly. He'd been Diane's next-door neighbor for 20 years. He'd notarized her holiday cards practically. Not exactly an impartial third party. I sat with that discovery for 3 days before I said a single word to anyone. The following Friday, I stopped by Diane's house to pick up a serving dish Colin had left there. The front door was unlocked, and I let myself in quietly, calling out that it was just me. No one answered. I heard voices in the kitchen, Diane and Paige. "She still hasn't noticed a thing," Paige was saying, laughing into her wine glass. "God, she's so busy playing decorator. She wouldn't notice if her whole savings account grew legs and walked out the door." Diane laughed too, that bright, tinkling laugh she used at charity galas. "That's exactly the point, sweetheart. People like Maren think spreadsheets are romantic. She'll never look past the numbers she wants to see." I stood frozen in the hallway, the same hallway where, months later, I'd hear the line that finally confirmed everything. But this was the first time I understood with total clarity that this wasn't carelessness. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a plan. And I was the mark. I picked up the serving dish from the counter without a sound and left. The last piece fell into place almost by accident. Colin's Aunt Ruth, his late father's sister, mentioned over a phone call that she'd finally recovered from that whole mess with her retirement fund a few years back. I asked gently, "What mess?" Ruth hesitated, then told me. 9 years earlier, Diane had convinced her to sign over temporary management of a modest retirement account to simplify things after her divorce. Ruth had gotten back less than half of it eventually after a lawyer got involved. She'd never told the rest of the family. She was embarrassed. That's when I understood. This wasn't a one-time slip in judgment. This was a method. A woman who found the quiet, trusting people in her orbit and slowly, legally sounding LY, took what wasn't hers. I went home that night, opened a blank document on my laptop, and started building my folder. I made a decision that night, sitting across from Colin at our kitchen table, while he graded a work report, and had no idea his mother had used his forged signature to open a shell company in my name. I decided I would become exactly what Diane already believed me to be. Soft, distracted, financially illiterate, easy to steer. I started small. At the next family dinner, I fumbled with my phone when the bill came, laughing, saying, "Oh, I'm hopeless with this app. Colin always handles the money stuff." I bought a pair of reading glasses I didn't need and wore them low on my nose when anyone mentioned finances, blinking like the words on a page were slightly too small to matter to me. I let my posture soften, shoulders in, chin down, voice going up half an octave whenever Diane brought up the accounts. Internally, I was doing something very different. I was documenting every conversation. I was pulling notarized copies of every filing. I was meeting quietly with a forensic accountant named Priya Patel, who confirmed within our first meeting that the power of attorney bore a signature that didn't match a single sample of Colin's actual handwriting. "She thinks I'm harmless," I told Priya over coffee. "That's the whole plan. Let her keep thinking that." Priya looked up from the documents. "You know this is enough to press charges already, right?" "Not yet," I said. I want her to reach for everything. I want it all on paper before she knows I'm watching. I set the bait carefully. I opened a new account, small, only $5,000, and structured it to look on paper like an oversight. A forgotten inheritance account from my late grandmother, one I'd never gotten around to consolidating. I mentioned it once offhand at a family dinner, in my softest, most distracted voice. "Oh, I keep meaning to deal with that little account from Grandma Ellison. I never know what to do with these things." I watched Diane's eyes flick toward Paige. Just once. Just enough. I had a small recording device installed in the base of a lamp in my own home office, legal in our state for one-party consent, for the next time Diane helped with paperwork during one of her visits. And I asked Priya to flag any activity on the bait account and text me immediately, no matter the hour. 3 weeks later at Colin's birthday dinner, my phone buzzed against my thigh under the table. I didn't even glance down. I already knew what it said because Priya and I had rehearsed exactly this moment. Attempted transfer initiated on Ellison Bait account. Diane Ashford's name on the authorization request. Confirmed. I smiled at Colin over the candles and helped him blow them out. The restaurant was called Verrazano's, the kind of place with white tablecloths and a pianist in the corner, chosen by Diane for our 15th wedding anniversary dinner. An event she had, ironically, insisted on paying for, in front of everyone. She stood up halfway through the entrees, tapping her wine glass with a fork. "I just want to say," she began, beaming at the table of 12, "how proud I am of this family. And Marin, darling." She turned to me, voice dripping with faux affection. "I know finances aren't really your area, so I've taken it upon myself to help manage things a bit more closely. Someone has to look out for this family's future, since clearly some of us are a little too busy with paint swatches to notice." Paige laughed into her napkin. A few relatives chuckled awkwardly, unsure if it was a joke. I set down my fork. I didn't raise my voice. I never did. "That's actually a perfect segue," I said, reaching into my bag and pulling out the folder I'd carried through every quiet hallway for the past 6 months. "Because I've been meaning to thank you for your help too, Diane. Especially with Ashford Family Holdings." The table went quiet. Diane's smile didn't move, but her eyes did. "I don't know what you mean," she said. "I mean the LLC you opened in my name," I said, laying the incorporation documents flat on the white tablecloth. "Using a signature that isn't mine. And the power of attorney filed on our joint account, using a signature that isn't Colin's, since he was in Denver the week it was supposedly signed. I have the hotel records if anyone's curious. I set those down too. And the $5,000 transfer you attempted 3 weeks ago, out of an account I set up specifically to see if you would." Diane's face had gone the color of the tablecloth. "You don't understand the complexities of estate law, Marin." "I understand fraud," I said quietly. "I understand forgery. I understand that Ruth's retirement account 9 years ago wasn't the first time, and mine wasn't going to be the last if I hadn't stopped it." I picked up the fraudulent power of attorney document, held it up so the whole table could see the notary stamp from a man who'd known Diane for 2 decades, and tore it cleanly in half. At that exact moment, the restaurant's front door opened. 2 officers walked in. Priya and I had already filed the report a week earlier, timed with precision for exactly this evening. Once we confirmed the attempted transfer gave us everything we needed. "Diane Ashford," one of them said, "we need you to come with us." Nobody at that table laughed again. In the weeks that followed, the consequences arrived like dominoes, one after another. Diane was charged with forgery, financial exploitation of a family member, and fraudulent formation of a business entity. The forensic paper trail Priya and I built made the case almost embarrassingly easy for the prosecution. She avoided prison through a plea deal, but she was ordered to pay full restitution, placed on probation for 5 years, and permanently barred from holding any power of attorney or fiduciary role for a family member again. Paige, who had helped orchestrate parts of the scheme and had personally directed funds from the Shell LLC into a personal shopping account, was named as a co-defendant in a civil suit. She lost access to the family trust entirely and was dropped from her mother's will, not by a court but by Diane herself, in a final act of self-preservation that told everyone exactly who she really was. Harold Weiss, the notary, lost his commission after an investigation confirmed he'd backdated and falsely witnessed at least 4 documents over the years, not just for Diane, but for 2 other clients who, it turned out, had similar stories once they came forward. Ruth Collins' aunt was contacted by our lawyer and, with her blessing, filed a long overdue claim. She recovered a portion of what she'd lost 9 years earlier. Not everything, but enough that she cried on the phone with me for 10 minutes straight. And in the middle of all of it, I made sure to do one thing that had nothing to do with punishment. Diane's longtime housekeeper, a woman named Corazon who'd worked for the family for over a decade and had nothing to do with any of it, was suddenly out of a steady paycheck once Diane's assets were frozen. I quietly hired her at double her old rate to manage our studio's back office, and I covered 2 semesters of community college tuition for Paige's teenage daughter, a kid who deserved a future that had nothing to do with her mother's or grandmother's choices. Some people needed consequences. Others just needed someone to notice they hadn't done anything wrong. 8 months later, on a night when the rain was coming down in sheets and the wind had knocked our porch light out twice already, there was a knock at our door. I opened it to find Diane standing on our steps, soaked through, no umbrella, wearing a coat that had clearly seen better winters. She'd lost the house in the settlement. She was staying, I'd heard, in a 1-bedroom apartment across town. The good china long since sold off. "Marin," she said, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. "Please. I have nowhere else to go tonight. Just for one night." I looked at her for a long moment. I thought about the hallway. I thought about the laugh in the kitchen. I thought about Ruth crying on the phone. "I hope you find somewhere warm tonight, Diane," I said, calm and even, the same way I'd said everything else for the past year. "But it isn't going to be here." I closed the door. Not hard. Not a slam. Just firm, final and quiet. The same way I'd fought the whole battle. Colin wrapped his arm around me from behind as I stood there, listening to the rain. "You okay?" he asked. "I am," I said, and for the first time in over a year I actually meant it completely. Here's what I learned. The people who count on your kindness to blind you are usually the ones who deserve it least, and the people who count on your silence are usually hiding something loud. Quiet isn't weakness. Sometimes it's just the sound of someone building their case. If someone in your life has ever mistaken your patience for permission, I want to know. Has anyone ever underestimated you the way Diane underestimated me? If this story hit home, hit like, subscribe for more real family reckonings, and tell me in the comments. Would you have confronted her sooner? Or waited like I did?